Greetings, Canadian political pod listener. I'm your narrator, Gary, an artificial intelligence-generated voice. Exciting and serious sounding is what we typed in the AI voiceover input field. And boom, Gary exists. Hey, do you know what's not artificial? Not even one bit? The highly influential audiences, air quotes media podcasts, offer to its advertisers. And I say that with all the sincerity a machine learning, data-optimized, predictive network of interconnected neural nodes can muster. Whether your ad message is on Curse of Politics, the Herle Burly, Hotel Pacifico, or the brand new Race to Replace, you will be reaching cabinet ministers, members of parliament, the political class, the C-suite, and corporate Canada, leading journalists, and tens of thousands of engaged Canadians. People saying this is a unique political moment is underselling it. Policy is under scrutiny. A party leader is being voted on. The Ontario election is underway. There will be a new prime minister. And then there's the guy living in the White House who calls us the 51st state. Does anyone remember another time like this? I'm instantly scouring millions of data points to answer my own rhetorical question. No, you do not. This is when you need to get your message to the decision makers. Email us at contact@airquotesmedia.com. You'll be dealing with Jill and Todd, who are real, not artificial at all people, and generally very friendly. Well, Jill is anyway. We're still deciding about Todd.
Greetings, you curiouser and curiouser Herle Burly-ites. We're diving right into the Liberal leadership race today with former government House Leader, current candidate for Leader of the Party, and now two-time Herle Burly guest, the Honourable Karina Gould is here. Minister, I'm sure that being on here twice is your most proud accomplishment.
Yeah, I was going to say, add that to the Wikipedia and the LinkedIn profile right at the top. So
yeah, I figured. Thank you. There you go. There you go. Last time Ms. Gould was here, and for anyone who missed it 3 months ago, you can find the interview in our back catalog. We talked about her career in public service and the Trudeau government agenda going forward. Well, a hell of a lot can change in 3 months. So this time, it's about Ms. Gould's vision for the Liberal Party as its leader. Why is she running? What does she bring to the race? What's different about her candidacy from the other contenders? Why is she best placed to beat Poilievre? So for all that, Karina, thank you for taking the time to be here today.
Yeah, I'm glad to be here. It's great.
So this is Trump Tariff Day, and we'll get into that. But let's just go back to that interview 3 months ago that we had.
Sure.
Because I'm curious about juxtaposing it with today. When you were on the show, you were like a really vigorous defender of the Trudeau government that you were a part of. And now I understand cabinet solidarity, so I don't hold that against you. That was your job at the time. But now that you're free from that, when you were sitting here talking to me 3 months ago, how did you really feel about the prospect of an election with Justin Trudeau as leader?
Well, David, I am actually very proud of a lot of the things that we did in government, and I think there's a lot of really good things that we did. There are things that I would have done differently. And look, I would say that I think the polls were very clear as to how challenging an election things would have been had we kind of stayed the course. Yeah. And I think there is a huge opportunity for us as Liberals right now. We're seeing it in movement in the polls, but more than that, we're just feeling it. Like when I talk to Liberals across the country, there is a new sense, like there's a new lease on life almost. Like people are excited and they feel hopeful. And so I think, that's a really great thing for us.
Right. Okay, for sure. But that makes the point that everybody kind of knew he had to go. I'm really curious about the internal workings of the government. So externally, everybody has to be team. Internally, how frank were the discussions at that time about the political situation that the government was in?
Well, I'm not going to break caucus confidence or cabinet confidence, but look, there were a lot of really frank conversations going on. And I actually think that's healthy for a team as well, right? So even as part of a team, it's important to have healthy and honest conversations.
Right. Okay. So at the beginning, you mentioned that there's some things you would have done different, some things you're proud of, and some things you would have done differently. So when you look at the political situation of the government, and while Liberals are feeling some wind in their sails, there's still a big polling deficit there.
Sure.
Right? Is the government the victim of just being in office for 10 years, or did the government really lose its way and make some big mistakes?
Yeah, well, I think a little bit of both, if you will. So, like 10 years, 9 years, a decade is a long time to be in government. And I think it's natural for Canadians or any population to say, like, is this the right path that we're going on? Do they have new ideas? Are they still thinking about us as Canadians, or is there more focus on them as a government? And I think that, after 9 years in government, you get governmentitis and you start to think more like what it means to be the government in Ottawa as opposed to what people on the ground are asking for. And one of the things that I've reflected on a lot is we started to think more about what we would like to do as ministers or members of a government caucus, as opposed to what people on the ground were telling us that they wanted or needed. And I think that's a bit of a reflection of being in government for 9 years, but also being a bit further away from the grassroots. You're a party person. I'm a party person. I joined the party when I was 14. What got me into politics is the ability to share ideas and have debates and to have those debates on convention floors. And we kind of got away from that. We weren't listening to the grassroots as much as we should have been. And, members across this country, I was going to say militants, that's French, but members across this country of the Liberal Party have been kind of telling us what they're hearing on the ground. And they've been looking for an avenue to get into us as members of parliament and as cabinet ministers. And we just didn't pay as much attention. And I would put that on the collective we. Like, I don't think that falls just on any one shoulder. And that's something that, for me, particularly when I was on maternity leave last year, I started to reflect upon a lot, because I was home in my community talking to people in a way that
you were outside the bubble.
I was outside the bubble. And I was also understanding what pierced through and what didn't. And some of the things that my colleagues were worried about in Ottawa were not things that people were talking about on the ground. And the things that people were talking about on the ground were not necessarily things that made it into the bubble in Ottawa. So for me, it was really interesting to have that experience of being inside, but also being outside, to really get some perspective on what mattered, right?
I bet. My colleague on the Curse of Politics, Corey, tonight, said something that has really resonated with me, that he thought the Trudeau government was operating at the wrong level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs for the current time. That we were talking about self-actualization of society while people can't pay for their groceries, right? What do you think about that?
Yeah. So I guess where I will be fair to us as a government is that post-COVID, we had been going at, Mach speed, right, in terms of responding to the pandemic. And as the pandemic was ending and Canadians and the world was collectively traumatized by the pandemic, we were kind of like, wow, look, we got through the pandemic. Like, look how good a job we did getting through the pandemic. And that was true. And that was right. We got Canadians through the pandemic, but Canadians were telling us, like, oh my God, inflation is out of control. Like, I can't afford my groceries. My mortgage is like, I can't even imagine how much I'm paying on this. And we were like, but look how great a job we did on the pandemic. And that is, both of those things can be true at the same time. Right? It's just that I think we didn't hear Canadians where they were at that moment. And it took us too long to respond to what Canadians were telling us. Whereas, Pierre Poilievre in that moment seized on it. And he said, okay, affordability, that's the number one thing. We eventually got there as a government, but by that time, Canadians were like, well, did you hear us? Like, can we trust you with issues that matter to us? And I think we eventually, as I said, got there, and we started to make, important moves in the right direction. But at that point, was the trust still there? And I think the answer is no. And what I see now is this opportunity to rebuild trust with Canadians and to demonstrate that we hear them, we're listening, and we can actually respond to what they need in real time. And as you know, you've been in government. Government government is not agile, right? It is not something is agile. You're on a path, and that is, a determination of where you're going. And I think that actually what we need in the 21st century is a way to be more responsive and agile to the needs of Canadians. And that's hard to do, but I think that's what we need.
Awesome. Okay, thanks for that. So let's flash forward. Enough of the past. Let's talk about the future. So I have never in my life made a decision as monumental as you've made to throw your hat into this ring, to decide to run for the leadership of the party and the prime ministership of Canada, put yourself through the rigors, put yourself through the scrutiny of that, and present yourself as somebody that should be the prime minister of Canada, have your name on a ballot. I mean, by God, it's a big deal what you've done.
It feels daunting, doesn't it?
It does. It does. So what did you consider when you were thinking about whether to do that? What goes through your head?
Well, a lot. And, one thing that I think is unique about me in comparison to some of the others that are in this race is that I decided to do this 3.5 weeks ago. I have not been planning this and organizing.
You would argue that the other two have been organizing for some time?
I think they probably have been. And I have not. And so when I decided to do this, it was a reflection of people reaching out to me and saying that they would support me, that they believe in me, that they think I have the ability to do this and to do it well, and that I'm what the party needs in this moment. And so I reflected on that, spoke to my family, my husband. My 6-year-old doesn't quite grasp this. He asked when I came home last weekend if I had won and I was now the prime minister, and I was like, it takes a little bit more time to do that. But my husband is
impatient. He's just impatient.
Well, yeah. I mean, this concept of running in an election is even though, he's been alive, all his life has been that, it's still a hard concept for a 6-year-old to manage. And then it was do I have the experience and do I have the capacity to do this? And the answer for me is yes. I have 10 years in politics. I've gotten successively more responsibility through my cabinet portfolios. I know how to lead a team. I know how to respond in a crisis. I'm probably the most calm person that we have in the government of Canada, and I'm political. And what I was thinking about in this moment more than anything is that as we are going up against Pierre Poilievre in the upcoming election, we need somebody who is political and has political experience and who knows how to beat Pierre Poilievre. As much as I don't like his ideas and disagree with him, I can't deny that he is an extraordinary politician who knows how to be in politics, and he's been able to capture how to act in 2025. And one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot is that as the Liberal Party, we have still kind of been acting like it's 2015, and we need to adapt to 2025. And I think we need somebody who not only understands how to be a politician.
What's the key difference between those two eras?
It's like analog and digital.
Okay.
It's a completely different ballgame than it was in 2025. If I think about, or in 2015, if I think about when I ran in 2015, the Burlington Post, my local paper, published 3 times a week and went to every household in Burlington.
Right.
I don't even know if there's a physical copy anymore, and it is entirely digital. Where do people consume their information? On podcasts like this. Yes, there are still people watching Power and Politics, but how many people are sitting down at 5:00 to watch it, right? Maybe they're getting a clip off of social media. I think in 2015, we were super cutting edge, but we haven't necessarily adapted to where we are right now. And I also think we need new ideas. One of the criticisms that I have of Pierre Poilievre is while he's, I think, been able to master communicating in 2025, his ideas haven't changed. And he said so himself. He said on Jordan Peterson that he hasn't changed how he thinks about things since he was 14. And as much as I love 14-year-old boys, I'm not sure that their ideas are what should be running the country. I
just had a flashback to myself at 14, and I would agree with you. Yes.
Yeah. So I think it's also important that we have people whose ideas can evolve and grow with the times. And so much of our systems in government were designed in the 20th century, and they don't apply in the 21st century in a way that works for people. And so I think it's also about saying, like, we need to be able to run a campaign in 2025, but we also need ideas for 2025, and not ideas from the 80s and 90s and trickle down economics. Like, it's time to actually think about the future. And you know as well as I do that elections aren't about the past, they're about the future and what you're putting forward.
The Churchill rule.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And that's something that I often said to my colleagues post-pandemic, is that, remember, Winston Churchill won the war and lost the election.
Yeah.
And, I think when it came to the pandemic, we won the war, but then we lost kind of the direction of where the country was going.
Right. Okay. So Liberals who are out there trying to make up their mind right now about who to support, what do you think they should be thinking about?
Well, they should be thinking about who's best placed to defeat Pierre Poilievre,
Right.
because I think that's one of the most important
Well, let
things.
me just stop there. Why would a person conclude that was you?
Because I have been going head to head with him in the House of Commons over the last 18 months, and I know how to win, and I know how to get under his skin, and I know how to beat him.
What is the key to that?
I think it's being calm, it's being rational, but it's also being smart. He is bombastic, and somebody who goes out there, but he also has a big ego, and he thinks that he's the best and he's the smartest, and you have to demonstrate to him that you're better and you're smarter.
Is he smart, by the way? In your judgment, is he smart?
He is. Yes, he is. Yeah. I think it's at our peril that we underestimate him and that we assume that he's going to make a mistake. And I think, smarter people than me have said this, but arrogance is the kryptonite of the Liberal Party of Canada. And we cannot.
Jerry is not smarter than you.
But I think it's true. I think that's a truism. And I think that, we have to recognize that part of what is dangerous territory for us is if we present as being the smartest person in the room, and if we act like that. Because actually, I think what Canadians want right now is authenticity, and they want honesty, and they want someone that they're going to look at and say, they understand what I'm going through right now, and I trust them with the issues that I have to try and solve them. And that is what people are looking for. I mean, when we talk about how people consume information right now, why do they come to podcasts and long form interviews? Because they feel like they're getting a real conversation, and they feel like people are just telling them how it is, as opposed to trying to package it and make it nice. And this is where I think we have to be going. And I think that's what I offer, and I think that's what I bring to the table.
Okay. You'll get nothing and like it. A talent of mine is that I can quote damn near 100% of the character dialogue from the movie Caddyshack. It's a dubious skill. That particular line is from Judge Smales, played by the great Ted Knight, to his nephew Spaulding, who can't decide whether to get a cheeseburger or a hot dog. But I think you can reasonably apply it to the battle for consumer choice and genuine competition in high-speed internet service. You'll recall that a federal cabinet order suggested our presenting sponsor TELUS be barred from accessing the fiber networks required to offer those services to new customers in Ontario and Quebec. The upshot? Consumers in those markets could lose out on lower prices, 19% lower in Ontario compared to a year ago, and also miss out on innovative service bundles. But what they're not doing is sitting quietly and liking it. I'll get to that part in a second. The two corporate giants in the region, the Bell and Rogers duopoly, let's call it Brogers, have been getting their say, and for the moment, their way. Their message has been amplified through the megaphone of a proxy organization, the CNOC, Competitive Network Operators of Canada, who've put forward arguments that closely mirror Brogers' own. A concerning alignment with the very entities they were meant to challenge. So whose interests are being served here? Consumers or corporations? I mentioned people are not sitting quietly and accepting all of this. There are over 200,000 signatures on a petition supporting TELUS's entry into Ontario and Quebec. These are 200,000 voices representing families and businesses who clearly don't like what they've been handed for years now: limited options and high prices. 200,000 voices demanding change in the form of true competition. You can add yours at demandmoreinternetchoice.ca. The question here isn't whether competition is good for consumers. It always is. The real question comes down to this: are we going to listen to those voices or continue to protect the status quo? So you mentioned beating Pierre Poilievre.
Yeah.
And I will say to you, I think, as devout a partisan of the Liberal Party as there is in Canada, that I think that there's a 5% chance we win the next election and a 95% chance we don't. How should that affect how Liberals think about this race?
Well, then, so look, I'm an optimist and a bit delusional, because you have to be, I think, to be a politician, because you're in it to win it at all times. Yep. And you have to see a path to victory, right? Like, you always have to see that.
I understand. You run to win, but I'm just trying to be objective about the likelihood of it.
But what I would say is that I think there are two things that Liberals should be thinking about. One, who is best placed to win as many seats as possible for the Liberal Party of Canada. So either majority government, minority government, official opposition, whatever that is, who's best placed to do that. And yep. The person that's best placed to do that is the person that is going to be able to actually get one over Pierre Poilievre, right? Yeah. Like that, I think, again, political is important here. And the second one is, worst case scenario, we don't win government, but hopefully we're official opposition. Who is the best person to hold Poilievre to account and to rebuild the party? And so again, I'm in it to win it, but I'm here for today, and I'm also here for tomorrow. And if we are going to put ourselves in a position where, we don't see ourselves winning government this time, but we want to the next time, we need to be in a really strong position, right? Like, we need to be a party that has a meaningful base in Parliament off of which we can rebuild and we can come back even stronger. And I think in both of those scenarios, that person is me.
One of the concerns people expressed to me about Mark Carney, who seems to be the front runner in this race right now, is that if we end up with 50 seats or something like that, is he going to really stick around and run? Is that something you think Liberals should be thinking about?
I think so. I mean, I won't speak specifically about Mark Carney, because that's a decision for him to make and for him to clarify with Liberals and with Canadians. But as I started off this conversation, like, I've been a member of the party since I was 14. I've been there through the good times and I've been there through the bad times. When you think about 2015, I remember telling my husband that when I decided to run, that I was like, we're going to win all of these things. And then, in May 2015, we were like third or fourth in the polls. And my husband was like, what are you doing? Right? Why are you running for the Liberal Party of Canada when, like, you don't have a hope in hell, right? Like, what's going on? But for me, the Liberal Party of Canada means so much. And it is the vehicle through which, I get to try to improve my country and work for my country. And so this is, for me, about doing this for the party and doing this for the country, because I know that Liberals have an important role to play in Canada.
Since we were talking about Carney,
okay.
Why are you and him still talking about climate change? Don't you know nobody cares about that right now? Like, you won't scrap the carbon tax, you'll only delay it. And he says he'll scrap it, but he spends yesterday talking about a 30-point plan on climate. I'm dead serious. Nobody wants to hear that right now.
I mean, I was talking about it in response to a question as opposed to making an announcement about it. So, my first big announcement was actually about party reform, right? Because I'm running for the job I want, which is leader of the Liberal Party of Canada, right?
Right.
Obviously that comes with being prime minister as well, but like, let's remember the job that we're running for, and that's leader of the Liberal Party of Canada. And so I put out a 3-point plan on party reform because I actually want to hear from the grassroots. I want to have policy conventions. I want to give more autonomy back to EDAs and to regions, because I think that's how we grow the party across the country. I know you're from Saskatchewan. I was talking to some Saskatchewan Liberals. They're out there, and they, those are like dyed in the wool Liberals. Like, if you are still a party member and working hard in Saskatchewan, like you care, right?
But why would you bother to be a riding president in Saskatchewan under the current structures of the Liberal Party?
Well, so this is it. We need to hear their voices, and we need to have their input, and we need to think about ways that we are doing a better job of hearing people from across the regions. And so I care about those things, and I want Liberals to have that voice. And I want to bring back the youth director position. Like, these things matter, and they grow our party and they build our party. So
I wouldn't know my wife if it hadn't been for that position. Terry O'Leary was the first national youth director of the Liberal Party in 1980, and I was the president of the Saskatchewan Young Liberals.
See, right? So not only is it important for the future of our country, but it's also important for matchmaking, right?
Anyway, I couldn't agree with you more on the importance of that position. And
but then the second announcement that I made, like my big policy announcement, was on affordability, right? Like, the first big policy announcement I made was on affordability. On Thursday, I announced that for a year I would reduce the GST to 4%. Like, what we're hearing from Canadians right now is that things are too expensive. So what's a way that the government of Canada can make things less expensive? Suspend the GST by 1% for 1 year. And then I said that I would increase corporate taxes for the wealthiest corporations, so those that make more than $500 million a year in profit, from 15 to 17%, and then to really go hard on competition policy. Like, we need to have more competition in this country so that consumers have more choices, better prices, and so that small and medium-sized enterprises can actually compete. So that was my first big one. My climate stuff, which I care about. I still care about the environment. I still care about climate, but it was more responsive as opposed to leading.
Right. But do you agree with me that we can't lead with that in the election campaign?
This election is about affordability. This election is about economic security. And, as much as I respect the importance of being a strong economy in the G7, when Canadians are thinking about the economy, they're thinking, do I have a job that pays the bills? Can I afford to buy groceries? And can I put my kids into after-school activities? Like, we're talking about, pocketbook issues and things that everyday Canadians are thinking about. They're not thinking about, and it's important, but productivity. They're not thinking about where do we rank in the global system. They're thinking about, how does this impact me and my ability to pay for the things that I need to pay for?
Right. So I want to talk some more about this trade war that's apparently hurtling toward us, specifically as it concerns Canadian forest products. Here are a couple of facts. First, the United States is not self-sufficient when it comes to softwood lumber. It doesn't produce nearly enough to satisfy the appetite of its consumer economy. Second, Canadian softwood is superior. That's just a fact. Because of our climate, Canadian lumber grows more slowly. So it's more stable than the stuff that comes out of pine forests in the American South. It's easier to handle, to cut, and to nail, and it's a lot more popular with builders. Which is why up to 30% of the softwood lumber Americans consume each year comes from Canada. 28 million cubic meters in 2023. Our sponsor, CN, moved a lot of that. Look, American protectionism is nothing new to Canada's forest industry. Various U.S. administrations, pushed by American producers, have deployed tariffs to limit Canadian competition. It's been hashed out at trade tribunals. It was a major reason for the existence of our free trade agreements with the United States. Canada has even agreed to impose voluntary caps on exports. My point is, negotiation is the way to deal with trade issues. Negotiation and respecting signed agreements. As Harold Macmillan said, jaw is better than war. CN has been moving forestry products mostly lumber, pulp, and paper, between our two countries for more than a century. The railway believes in smooth, unhindered free trade. Tariffs and the inevitable retaliatory tariffs are, as somebody on this pod said last week, like chemotherapy. You get really sick before you get better. Hundreds of thousands of jobs on both sides of the border are at risk. They don't have to be. So I've had some economists on this show who basically said to me that the affordability thing is a bit of a byproduct, not to challenge your point about what matters politically right now, I'm not. But they've told me that basically as a society, as a country, we're getting poorer. And we're getting poor, and so that's reflective in people's buying power out there, that we're getting poorer. And one of the things that they say to me, and I have a really difficult time with this as a liberal, and I sort of challenge some of these economists, is they say we've got too many regulations in Canada on building. It's too difficult to build things, whether they be natural resource projects or anything else, a house. There's just too many regulations. I tend to have a default that regulations are there for a reason, to protect us from unscrupulous activities that corporations might engage in if they weren't regulated. But do we have to put some water in our wine there?
I actually do think that we do need to do that. I've had some really interesting conversations, particularly with business leaders in the AI space, that are like, we are on the cusp of doing something amazing, but it's going to be up to us in Canada to decide whether we do this in a way that is still regulated and safe, but that harnesses our potential, or whether we kind of truncate ourselves and are not able to do it. And, when I think about AI in particular, I mean, the father of AI was here in Canada. And yet we have all these amazing companies, but are we going to allow them to scale up and grow, or are they going to move somewhere else? And I think that we can be smarter on regulation, thinking about the things that we want and how we avoid the things that we don't want, without being overly burdensome. I think there's a way to do that. It just requires different thinking. And again, it's not looking at the models of the past. Like, maybe this is a bit idealistic of me, but one of my frustrations, having been in government for the past decade, is that we do everything in the rearview mirror. Right? We're always responding to something bad that has happened and trying to regulate around it or trying to legislate around it, as opposed to being forward thinking and saying, okay, how do we actually create the environment and the system that we want based on the values that we have, and say, fit within this value frame. Whatever you do within that, that's fine, as long as it fits within the value frame. And I'll give you a good example is when I was Minister of Democratic Institutions and was working on cybersecurity in our elections. And I was updating the Canada Elections Act. I was saying, okay, when it comes to the social media platforms and our elections, everything we've done in Canada on advertising, pretty much on advertising, that's the big one in elections, is done in this analog model, right? What's happening on TV, what's happening on radio, where everybody gets fair play, there's transparency in terms of funding, where your audience is going to. Well, the digital platforms don't work like that, like at all, right? And so our entire framework doesn't work for today. And we haven't figured out how to create a regulatory environment or a legislative environment that works in a dynamic way like that. And I think, whether it's the digital platforms, whether it's the advent of AI, we're going to have to think very differently about how we legislate and regulate for the future, because things are going to change really quickly and we're not going to be able to keep up otherwise. It's the same thing. And I might get some pushback from some people as I say this, but like with the CRTC, I think we have to figure out a way to have really solid Canadian content to make sure that gets to Canadians, but we can't think about it in the structure from the 1950s and the 1960s, because we just don't live in that world anymore. And I think it's like there's a moment for us as Canada, and I know we were going to talk about Trump and the tariffs, and we don't want that to take over, but I actually think that there's a huge opportunity for us right now to recognize the moment that we're in and to build the architecture that will be for the future, right? And if I think about, the Trump tariffs that are very scary and there's a lot of anxiety about them, it's actually also an opportunity for us to pivot and reevaluate and think about how we can take advantage of this moment and the opportunities that it is presenting to change how we're doing things. And like you, I'm a liberal. I believe in regulation because I think it's important to keep us safe. But how do we think about it differently to take charge of the moment that we find ourselves in?
Right.
That's pretty disruptive, but I think important.
It's a very interesting response, and you've actually wandered into an area I know just a little bit about. No. So, not a lot, just a little. And so my perception would be that if an impactful, popular Canadian television show is going to be made in this era, it will be made by a streaming service, not by a network. And yet the Liberal government has seemed to be at war with the streaming services. So what's the juxtaposition there? I mean, Amazon Prime, that's where I watch shit now, right? Right? And I see shows from all over the world there. I don't know why I don't see more shows from Canada there.
Although, okay, so I'm going to say maybe you should watch some of the CBC Gem stuff because Working Moms, really good show, right? The other one, Run the Burbs, really good show. Okay. So there's some really good stuff out there. But I think, again, there is a role for the networks. There's a role for CBC, and I think there's a really important role for CBC Radio Canada in our country as like an institution where people can access news and Canadian content. But then, in terms of the streaming services, how do we manage that in a way that fits within our culture and within our objectives? So not saying that they're bad and we shouldn't have them, but how do we work with them? And I think this is really hard. And so I'm not gonna say that we didn't have our hearts in the right place, but it maybe didn't fit for the moment that we're living in. And we have, entrenched institutional interests in this country that I understand, and I understand where they're coming from, but how do we adapt to the moment that we're living in? And, I'll maybe say one thing, is that, I was a little offended that one of the candidates chose to launch their campaign in the United States, right? As opposed to in Canada.
You mean the Jon Stewart show?
Yeah. And, it was great. I enjoyed watching it, but okay, well, why not in Canada? Right. And why didn't we do that? And so there is, I think, an issue.
But be honest, is there a Canadian show that would have generated as much buzz around a candidacy as that show did? No,
but I think that's concerning. Right. I think that's actually concerning. And I think that is something where we have to say, okay, how is it that in 2025, we enable Canadian shows and Canadian platforms to showcase our own culture and our own politics. And so we clearly haven't gotten that right. And I think that it is kind of saying that, American culture is dominant in Canada, even though a lot of, the American stars are.
Well, I understand Chrystia Freeland's going on Fareed Zakaria tomorrow. And I bet you that gets more play in Canadian papers than it would be if he'd gone on Question Period. If she got on Question Period.
Yeah, probably. But I think that there's an issue with that. I think as Canadians, we need to be thinking, and maybe this is to your point about streaming services, how do we ensure we have Canadian content there? Because, and you've knocked on lots of doors. I always find it hard as a candidate when I knock on a door and someone's watching CNN and talking to me about American politics during a Canadian election. And I'm like, okay, that's great. I know what you're watching in the United States, and it's important to know what's going on there because obviously it has a big impact on us. But if you care about healthcare and you care about education and you care about, whatever else it is in Canada, you also need to know what's happening here in Canada. So we haven't gotten the mix right. And so I think it requires more thinking from us about how we do that. And that's something that I feel very strongly about.
TikTok has been a major champion of Canadian creators, musicians, and small businesses who are using the platform to reach a global community of over 1 billion users. TikTok Canada has a team of hundreds of local employees dedicated to supporting the success of Canadian creators and businesses on its platform. The federal government, however, has ordered TikTok to shut down its Canadian offices. While the TikTok app will remain available in Canada, TikTok's hundreds of Canadian employees will lose their jobs, eliminating important roles and the support that's provided for the over 14 million Canadians who use TikTok. TikTok Canada believes it's important to have employees in Canada, supporting Canadian creators and advertisers, paying Canadian taxes, and operating under Canadian law. Facts matter. Simply put, shutting down TikTok Canada eliminates jobs and stymies investments in Canada. Stay tuned over the next month to hear more about the work that TikTok Canada's employees do to support the success and safety of Canadians on TikTok. So let's talk about Trump.
Sure.
And the United States. Mm-hmm. So today is the day that we find out the tariffs are coming on, apparently 25% on all goods other than oil and gas, which will be 10%. That's the same for Mexico. China's tariff is only 10%, oddly. And apparently the excuse for the tariffs remains fentanyl. These tariffs will remain in place until we eliminate fentanyl from 30 ounces to 0 ounces crossing the border, I guess. And we're told now that if we retaliate, the tariffs will go up. So this is this is a nightmarish scenario for Canada. I don't expect you to have a plan for victory in this fight, but just talk to me a little bit about how you see Canada, if you were the Prime Minister, how would you be dealing with the United States, not just at this very moment, but over the next 4 years? What kind of a relationship are we going to have?
Well, I mean, look, first of all, I think there's a lot of anxiety amongst Canadians to hear these threats and to hear that this is coming down the pipeline in the coming days. But I guess what I would say to you and to Canadians is that this is how President Trump operates, right? He goes for the big and he goes for the chaos and he goes to try and create fear to force people into submission. And I don't think that that's the response that we should be giving. I don't think the response is just to say like, okay, take whatever you want. Like we're just going to give everything up. Right. That's, when bullies ask for your lunch money and you give it to them, they don't leave you alone. They just come back and shake you down for more. Yeah. I
know how to deal with a bully, by the way, because I was bullied in elementary school. Okay. And I know how to deal with a bully, and that is to have your mother call their mother. And I don't know if Mrs. Trump is alive anymore to call, but I guess we could try calling Melania. Maybe that will work. But except on that front, David, I mean, like this is also going to hurt Americans a lot. Right. So, and, not to say that Americans are the mother of the president, but who are our bosses as politicians? They're citizens. Yeah. Right. And he ran on an election to make things more affordable. Right. Everybody says that he won the U.S. election because of the price of eggs. Yeah. Right. And so when the price of so many goods goes up in the United States, like he's directly responsible for that. And so I think there's a couple of things. One is getting our message across to American citizens that, this is a result of the president's action. Like we can actually say to Americans with full clarity, like this is not something that we want as Canada at all. Actually, can't say that once we retaliate. The message is going to get very confusing once we retaliate. Right?
But I think one of the things that we should be doing is communicating with Americans, directly with Americans about, how deep and long our friendship is, how important our allyship is, how we have been there side by side in conflict after conflict, fighting together, dying together, being there together, and that we build things together as well. Like that is one of the things that has made the North American economy as strong as it is because of the integrated nature of our economy. So I think that's something that's important.
I'm going to hold you to account right now, though, on that.
Yeah.
Because when I watch American television, I see Ontario government ads that say exactly that.
Yeah.
Where are the Canadian government ads?
Well, I think there should be Canadian government ads doing that.
Right.
I really do. I mean, I think that is something that we should be doing, and spending in a big way. Like this is our economy. These are our jobs. Like this is the most important thing that we are going to be dealing with. And so that's something that I think we should be doing, is speaking directly to Americans and not just American politicians, because like I know as a member of parliament, when I hear from people in my constituency, that galvanizes me more than, a US congressman who would call me. Right.
Yeah.
So, and I think it's also about speaking to American businesses. Like I was talking to someone who, they're like a metal producer in Toronto, and they're the only ones that make this kind of metal. And the foundries in the US are kind of wholly reliant on this company. And there's other smaller producers in the United States, but they wouldn't it would take them a decade to be able to scale up to the point in which they'd be able to have as much product as they get from Canada, right? And so it's their customers in the United States that are freaking out because there's no way they would be able to source enough product domestically in years to be able to make up for what they're going to lose from Canada, or to the amount of tariffs that are going to be on it. And so it's those American customers that also need to be calling their Congress people and saying, whoa, what are you doing here? Like,
That's right.
This is not just about Canada. This is about jobs in the United States, and it's about our ability to produce. And those metal products, they go into a ton of the infrastructure in the United States. So if they don't have the product from Canada, they can't deliver to their infrastructure buildings projects in the United States. And there's a cascade of jobs that are impacted, not just in Canada, but in the United States. And so I think it's making that very clear as well. And then the third thing is like United Team Canada approach. Like we have to all be Captain Canada, from the Prime Minister to the cabinet, to the premiers, to every elected politician, to every business leader and every citizen. Like one of the things that I'm sure you're seeing online too, and hearing from friends and family, is that when they go to the grocery store, they're like looking at products and they're like, okay, this is in the United States, this is American, I'm not buying that, I'm buying the Canadian one, right? Like there's, this moment of like, okay, what can we do as individuals? And so I think there's an opportunity as well to say, and
Canadian almonds are really expensive.
Well, maybe we're not getting Canadian almonds. Maybe it's a different source of protein. Maybe we're getting peas, right? And lentils. Changing some of our consumer habits, but to support our domestic producers. Yeah. And then, the other thing that we were talking a little bit about, but I think we need to be talking about it in a much bigger way, is interprovincial trade and east-west trade as opposed to north-south. And, as I was talking about using this moment for reimagining our regulatory framework in Canada, we should also be using this moment to reimagine our interprovincial trade in Canada, and saying very clearly that now is the time, premiers, to bring those barriers down. Like it's ridiculous, some of the barriers that we have in this country. And so like, if it's harder to trade north-south, let's make it easier to trade east-west. And then the other thing too that I think we should be doing, David, one thing that our government did really well is sign trade agreements around the world. So there are opportunities to trade around the world. It's been easy to trade with the United States. So I do not fault Canadian companies for being focused on the United States, because it is the largest market in the world and it's right next door to us. But one of the lessons that we learned from the last Trump administration is open up new markets. Now it's time for us, I think, as a government to say, let's help you Canadian companies actually access those markets.
Trevor Tombe last week on this podcast told me, though, that much of U.S.-Canada trade, and I actually didn't realize this, I should have, is intra-company.
Yeah.
It's the same company operating on both sides of the border, trading between itself.
Yeah.
That's what so much of our trade is. Well, that's a little more difficult to flip to Europe or Asia.
Yeah, but let's think about it, right? And let's think about how we do it. I mean, look, I'm from Burlington, Ontario, so I have manufacturing heartland here, and so many companies that go back and forth. I mean, when the first Trump administration was there, I was sent on a trade mission to Buffalo, and which was great.
What a perk!
Yeah, I know Mark Garneau went to Cape Canaveral, and Catherine McKenna was in Silicon Valley, and Karina Gould went to Buffalo. But what I can say is that so much of the manufacturing base in Buffalo wouldn't exist if Southern Ontario wasn't here in the manufacturing heartland that it was, right? And one clear example is the Ford stamping plant in Buffalo would not exist if we didn't have the Ford assembly plant in Oakville. Right. So it is, intra-company trade. But again, these are American jobs that rely on having that in Canada. And Buffalo is a lot further away than a lot of the other kind of big cities in the United States. And so there is a real economy that happens because of where Buffalo is in relation to Canada. So, so I hear you, and I guess I'm just saying, I know that too. So.
Right? Yeah. One of the you talked about how we all need to be on Team Canada, and everybody needs to be on the same page, and you talked about the need to integrate more East-West. All this, I just have to say, and I was just looking for a reaction from you, that I have felt over the last number of years, and I'm not talking about just the years of this government, Canada slipping away on us just a little bit, day by day. I mean, I it's certainly been my perception that Quebec is quietly quitting Canada, and I've seen the alienation, and I'm from the prairies, and I know it was bad in 1980, and it was a big topic of conversation 45, 50 years ago, Western alienation. But it's at a different level now. It's in a different place now. And there is a really deep-seated sense that there's conflicting interests. And all of which makes me really worry. We're all rah-rah right now. But a year and a half from now, after the grind of what this has done to us and the economic hardship and the economic displacement that's taking place in various parts of the country, I'm genuinely worried about whether the Federation can withstand this.
I think that's a very legitimate worry to have. I guess that's why we need a Captain Canada more than ever right now. It's, again, I'm a very optimistic person. I think it's hard to be in politics if you're not an optimist. But
you can be an advisor.
Yeah.
But you can't run.
It's very hard. Yeah, it'd be very hard to run and put your name on a ballot if you're not an optimist. But I guess my thinking on this, and again, it's there are a lot of people in our country, for better or for worse, or for true or for not, who feel like they haven't been listened to, and they feel like their voice is not the one that's getting through. And I think it's a little bit an issue of the time too, because there's a lot more echo chambers. And so, people who feel disgruntled can kind of feel disgruntled together and find disgruntled people, around. And they don't have to talk to other folks about why, there's other opinions or viewpoints. But I also think that it goes back to maybe what we talked about in the last podcast is pride in country, and talking more about how proud we are to be Canadian, and to think and to be very what's the word, clear and determined and specific about why it is that we should be proud to be Canadian and what makes us unique and special as Canadians. And what I'm always amazed by is that, when you do polling across the country, the issues that people care about are very similar, no matter where they are. They might have slightly different feelings about them, or they might rank them a little bit, but there's actually not that much that's different, in terms of the things that people care about at their core, but how they talk about them can be very different, and how they feel that they're being perceived, I think, is also very different. But like, again, there's this opportunity, I think, right now for us. So you can see a challenge and it can break you or it can make you. And I would want to think and believe that the challenge that we are confronting, if we have the right person and people leading us, can actually make us again as a country as opposed to break us. But that means that we have to choose that path, and we have to work at that path, and we have to be open and dedicated to listening to what the grievances are and trying to find a way to make people feel heard and listened to, and to actually say that this is an opportunity for us as Canada to really come out on top of this. I know you said you don't think I have a plan for victory, but I do think that victory is possible. Like, it's not necessarily that, I don't think anybody wins in a trade war, but I think that we can come out on top. But we have to be laser focused, and we have to be determined, and we have to be thoughtful about that. And we have to say, here are the challenges that we have in Canada: interprovincial trade barriers. Enough. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now is the moment for us to bring those down, because the only way that we're going to come out stronger is if we're actually united and working together. Again, regulatory framework. Okay, we have to leave the way of the past behind, and we have to think about the future, because there is an opportunity for us. We have innovative, thoughtful, creative, smart people here, but it's hard for them to stay in Canada because we don't have the investment environment that they require, and we don't anchor them here in the right way. So again, I see lots of opportunity here, but we have to choose to take that path. And I really think that this can be like a make it moment for our country.
Great answer. Thank you for that. Mm-hmm. Let me radically diverge, because I'm running out of time. Take a radical zag here.
I'm curious as to where it's going to go.
Yeah. I note that there are a number of prominent Jewish Canadians supporting your candidacy. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering whether you and they hope that you can rebuild the very, very fractured relationship between the Jewish community and the Liberal Party.
Well, I think we have to rebuild it. The Liberal Party of Canada has always been a big tent party, and it has always been a home for people of every background, faith, region in this country. And I think it has to remain that way. One of the things that I feel very strongly about is that the Liberal Party of Canada, maybe with the exception of Mackenzie King, at least since Louis Saint Laurent, has been a home for Jewish Canadians who have liberal values and who feel that way. And we have to ensure that that is the case moving forward. The first Jewish cabinet minister in Canadian history, Herb Gray, was a liberal. And, I don't want to see, I can't see a Liberal Party of Canada that is not a home for Jewish Canadians and Canadians of all different backgrounds and faiths. That is what makes our party what it is: the diversity, the commitment to multiculturalism, to inclusion, to belonging. That is what is meaningful to me, and really kind of in our bones as liberals. And we have to get back there.
Couldn't agree with you more. Some of the greatest liberals I've ever known have been Jewish Canadians. Herb, you mentioned. Obviously, Erwin Kotler is another, and there's many more. Jerry Grafstein, who's supporting you, has been a pillar of the Liberal Party through his entire life. But I would argue that I think two things have happened that have changed the history. One of which is that Canadian Jews have by and large decided that support for Israel is their number one issue, and that it overrides all other issues.
That.
And the second thing is that Stephen Harper changed what Jews perceived the Canadian government position could be.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that Canadian Jews, like Canadians of all faiths and backgrounds, are multifaceted people who put Canada first, and that is something that is really important. Is that they might have feelings and views on Israel, and that is important to them, but at the end of the day, they're Canadian first. And so I think that's really, really important to set out there, because one of the things that I have been really worried about over the past 15 months is the rise in anti-Semitism and the accusation that Canadian Jews are more closely aligned with Israel than they are with Canada. And I think that's something that we have to dissuade people of, and to say that that's just not a fair thing to say about our fellow country people in general. I think that, there are, like every group of people, there is a range of views and a range of opinions. But my belief here is that Canada can have an incredibly important role to play in peace in the Middle East, but we have to be very clear about what that can and could look like. And the only path forward in that is a two-state solution where Israelis and Palestinians live side by side in peace and security.
But are we an honest broker between the two sides, or are we on Israel's side?
Well, I think we're definitely not on Hamas's side, and we should never be on Hamas's side. But Israel is a friend, it's an ally, and Israel has a right to defend itself. However, we also need to make sure that we are supporting international law. And I think that what Canada does as a friend and as an ally is have honest conversations with our friends and with our allies. And we've always been a friend to the Palestinian people as well. And I think we have to maintain that, and we have to be able to have that conversation, because the only way we're going to achieve peace in the Middle East, and I know that, again, it's a hard conversation to have right now, given what's happened over the last 15 months in particular, but there is a ceasefire right now. And, we have to do everything we can to make this a lasting ceasefire and to work with Israelis and Palestinians on how they both live in peace and security, and how, they both live in a way where their peoples can be prosperous and safe. And that is something that, I've believed for a very long time and am very committed to pursuing. And we have to put our energy into that, and doing what we can, because it's both Palestinians and Israelis that deserve that.
Yeah. Great. Thank you for that thoughtful answer.
Yeah.
Again, another harsh zag to a different topic, which is winning the next election.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just say I've had the opportunity to run late-term governments a couple of times under Paul Martin and Kathleen Wynne. And I have developed in my mind a formula of what is involved in that. And one of the things that's involved in that is changing your leader. So the Liberals are now doing that, right? Second thing that's involved is disqualifying the leader of the opposition among large segments of the population for the job. We worked extremely hard at doing that to Stephen Harper in 2004 and to Tim Hudak in 2014 provincially. And I'm asking you, as somebody that has gone up against Poilievre in the House, know him obviously very well, what is disqualifying about him?
He's not serious.
What? Okay, go ahead.
He's not serious. He is not up for the job. We have seen time and time again that when he has to rise to the occasion to be a statesperson, he goes back into his corner and slings mud and is overly partisan. He doesn't know how to be respectful in the moment that is required. And that is not what we need as a prime minister. What we need as a leader, as a prime minister, is someone who can rise above partisanship. And I've never seen him do that.
Okay. All right. And my last question before I let you go back to getting votes and talking to Liberals out there is, so Liberals are looking at a race in which really what they're being told by the media is it's a 2.5 person race. You're in the top tier of of candidates, but people tend to think Carney and Freeland are ahead of you. I don't know if that's right or not. And in fact, to be honest, what the impression you would get is that the party's largely coalescing around Carney, at least at the elite level, right?
Sure.
What is your path to victory?
Well, so this
in the
is
leadership?
great. Yeah. So remember, there are 400,000 people that are party members right now, and I have all the respect for my colleagues who have decided to endorse, Christia or Mark. I think that's great. But that's about 70 people out of 400,000. And
Right.
it's one member, one vote. And one of my favorite things is that when a colleague calls to tell me that they love me and they're so excited I'm in the race, but they're going to endorse so and so, they always say, "But don't worry, my dad's voting for you," or "Don't worry, like my hairdresser is voting for you." And it's, I think, important for people to know that dads and hairdressers have equal vote to cabinet ministers and members of parliament. And
Right.
I've been so buoyed by what I've been hearing from people across the country who are excited about me entering the race, and a lot of young people, women, and actually a lot of seniors too, who have said that if I wasn't in the race, they probably would have sat this leadership out. And they're excited about the next generation of leadership. They're excited about having someone who is more youthful in the race and who's thinking very concretely, not about just the now, but also about the future. And I guess I'll make a pitch to your listeners is that if you've liked what you've heard, go to karinagould.ca, commit to vote, and make a donation.
What are some of the tactics you're using to reach people? I mean, because mainstream media is only intermittently interested in this race. So
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Well,
I'm
still doing mainstream media. I seem to be the candidate doing the most media of everyone. And actually, maybe just on that, David, I really think we need to make sure that this isn't a coronation and to have a really solid debate about the future of our party and the future of our country. And, I've put out a number of policy pieces, and I would want us to do that. I think Liberals deserve that. I'm also going on podcasts like this one, and others. I did a YouTube live stream with Steve Boots, and I'll do some more of those, and doing a lot of Zooms with members across the country. We have a really big country, like really, really big, and a very short race. And so even though I'm out on the road as well, there's great ways to connect with people online.
You've called for debates, haven't you?
Yeah, I have. Yeah. So
what is the party afraid of on that? Why wouldn't we have 6 debates, 8 debates? Like, why wouldn't we?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't we like be showing these people off to Canadians? Because you know what, you're not very well known. Mark Carney's not very well known.
Yeah.
Frankly, Chrystia Freeland's not very well known.
Well, but this is the thing in politics. Like, nobody's usually that well known, right? And so this is the way to generate interest, to have a conversation, dialogue. I don't know. I know Chrystia called for 4. I said, sure, let's do it. And then what I called for the other day was I said, well, if the party's not going to do it, why don't we get the Ottawa Press Gallery to put it on, and let's do it bilingually? Because guess what? Like, when you're in the House of Commons, you have to be able to switch between English and French on a moment's notice. So let's just do it. This is, and the other thing too is that, like, every candidate should be excited and keen to do this, because this is basically practice for the general election, and you only get better as you do it. And as I said from the outset, like, we need someone who's primetime ready to go against someone who is a very good politician. We might not like him, we might not agree with him, but he's good at what he does. And so we need to have the absolute best person putting themselves forward who's most prepared. And I think doing this is a great thing, because we're going to have to do it during the election too. Unfortunately,
there's more than 3 candidates. And like,
yes.
there's
5
I'm just going to ask you out of curiosity, and this is not a rhetorical question, it's a genuine question. Do you have any idea what the fuck Ruby Dalla is doing?
I don't know.
Like what?
I don't know. but Frank Bayless is working really hard, and I know that he's somebody who has really been working the ground. So
you're smart, looking for that down ballot support there. Oh my God. Thank you so much for doing this. It's been a blast. Thank you, Karina.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, David.
Yeah. So I'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, TELUS, and our sponsors, CN and TikTok Canada, all you Herle Burly-ites who watched or listened. And I'd really like to thank former Minister Karina Gould for coming here and sharing her thoughts, and Godspeed to you on the trail, Karina.
Thanks so much. Thanks. Take care.
Take care.
Herle Burly.